Get ready to find your recipe for a successful real estate lifestyle from America's top expert here at Greenlight REI with your host, Lance Edwards.
Well, everyone, welcome to this session of Greenlight REI, where you're going to learn the successful real estate lifestyle. And we've got an extra special guest on a topic today I think you're going to find really cool. This is Mr. Larry Pino. And I got to tell you about Larry. I've interviewed Larry before. He is a Renaissance man in a lot of different ways. You look at this gentleman's background, and what we're talking today, he's actually founder and CEO of Tuscan Gardens. That's actually the topic today. We'll get to that in a moment. He's also a practicing commercial attorney. He's full disclosure, he's my attorney, and he's also a businessman par excellence. He was CEO of Dynatech, a company which he grew to $250 million in 7 years. And he's had multiple enterprises. He's been started ever since college days. And I forgot to count. He tells me something like 70 or 80 different businesses and startups he's been involved in. And his most recent enterprise outside his full-time legal practice is setting up senior living facilities, namely called Tuscan Gardens. And I invited Larry today because the story about how he envisioned Tuscan Gardens, how he got started when he knew nothing absolutely at all about senior living, and has now manifested Tuscan Gardens into one of the premier senior living facilities in the state of Florida. I've been into one of them in Venice recently, and I saw it. I said, "This is outstanding, Larry. We got to tell this story." So, Larry, welcome to the podcast.
Well, I'm delighted to be here, Lance, and thanks for inviting me back.
It's great. And oh, by the way, we got to get a plug in, and maybe we'll talk about this. Larry's got a book. It's called Reinventing Senior Living, and it was it's part of the process here in creating this new enterprise. He got started. So Larry, you've got Tuscan Gardens up and running. It's growing. Senior living facilities. It's not like you didn't already have plenty on your plate. What led to you coming up with this idea for senior living facilities?
Yeah. So backdate this thing to about 2010, as you know, Lance, I've always been both practicing lawyer, commercial lawyer, and always been an entrepreneur. And after the Great Recession, sort of leveled a whole lot of different businesses out there. I ended up selling off all of the assets of the prior company that I had. And literally, once I sold them off, I had nothing else to sell. So I'm basically continuing on, trucking along, practicing law. And in the meantime, my mother, my dad passed away way too young in age. He was not quite 72. So Mom was fine, during that entire time. We moved her 7 minutes away from our house in Winter Park, Florida. And there came a time in which she wasn't okay anymore. And so, I got 24/7 care to take care of Mom. And that was fine. But, as she got older and older and her friends passed away, the only ones that she would see besides the caregiver every day were us, our family, where we'd go in on Saturdays and Sundays and talk to Mom and, have dinner with her or whatever on weekends, but pretty much no more. So I started looking in about 2010 and I'd look at the community around, which is Central Florida, and I'd look at these places where I could put Mom primarily from a socialization standpoint. So she had somebody to talk to besides the caregiver, who was a wonderful caregiver, but at a certain point, you only have so much to talk about, right? So I'd go in there and, I just got to tell you, it was melancholy. It was, the smells. And these are not aromas, these are smells. And, it's dimly lit. It's melancholy. And so I'd go back home and I'd tell my sister, I'd say, Joy, not going to happen. I'm not going to put Mom there. I'm just not going to do it. So any event, so this is kind of like going on, and I'm looking around and I'm trying to figure out, okay, what's my next generation from an entrepreneurial standpoint? And at the same time, I'm sort of thinking about mom's situation. And finally, as I'm processing this thing, I'm saying to myself, so what is it? I mean, it's not like I'm the only guy out there who's not willing to put his mother into one of these places. What would it have to look like? What would it really have to look like for me to want to put my mother? And so there came a time in which I really literally remember, this would have been in about July of 2010. And I remember pulling out a notebook and saying, okay, so, and a pen, and I start writing down what it would look like. I'd say, well, I want to make sure it has great big ceilings. And I want to make sure it has lots of natural light that's coming in. And I want lots of plants and herbs and basil. And I want an exposed kitchen in the great room. And I'm going to call it a great room. And the exposed Tuscan kitchen is going to have a great big pot of tomato sauce, so that when people walk through, they're smelling the aromas of bolognese sauce being made on our Tuscan kitchen, and so forth and so on. And so I literally envisioned this thing. And in the meantime, I'm talking back and forth to myself like, you're nuts. You don't know anything about senior living. And, and the other side says, yeah, I know, but it's not out there. And this is the way that I would envision it. And so I literally battled all the way through the balance of 2010 and into 2011 until I finally said, I want to do this. I want to do this. I don't know anything about it, but I'm going to learn. And so I went to school. So, I mean, basically, I read everything I could. I read every book I could. I went to every conference I could. I'd look at public companies that were doing assisted living to see what their financial statements looked like and what were the pro formas and what were the performance statements of performance for them, and what are the net profit margins and where do the expenses lie. And I did everything in my power to really look to see. And I started meeting people at the conventions and trade shows. And I'd sit there and I'd say, hey, listen, this is kind of what I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about this thing. I want to call it Tuscan Gardens. I want it to be very upscale. I want it to have this wonderful lifestyle for seniors. I don't want them to sit there and play bingo. I want them to have art and music and just a book clubs and all of these incredible activities. Until finally, I got enough momentum. In the beginning, Lance, it was like pushing a boulder uphill. I mean, it was the end of the recession. Nobody was financing anything. I was in an industry that I had never been in before. And so little by little, I finally developed a team and began the process. And we found our first piece of property in Venice, Florida, which is the one that you had a chance to see that day when you came by. And, I sucked it up and put the land under contract, and the process began. So in any event, that's the story of it. So if I maybe bring you up to 10,000 feet, it was, number one, it was front and center personally in my mind. So I was looking at it and living it. And then number two, it was maybe the opportunity to look at it because it was front and center and to say, okay, what could I do to potentially create value out of the situation of the fact that there isn't this type of community out there that I could offer my mother. If it's not out there, I want to create it. And so that's what really the origin of this thing became. So that's it. It was a long story, but that's kind of the story.
No, but it's beautiful because, recap, it started from a strong reason why. Number one,
sure.
Mother. You did what it took to go learn what you needed to know to do it. You assembled a team who knew about this as well.
Sure.
And so now you've got Tuscan. Give us the status of Tuscan Gardens right now. You've got some operational, you got some in development. Let everyone know what's going on with Tuscan Gardens.
Yeah, no, it's
state
great.
right
I
now.
mean, at this point, matter of fact, I just had a lunch with some guy wonderful guy. I've known him for years. I represent him as his lawyer. And, now I'm 8 years later. So now suddenly I'm the expert, right? So, I was a novice that knew nothing about this thing, and now I'm the expert. So he's talking to me as an expert in this field. So no, we're very gratified, right? So Venice is operational. It's been operational since November of 16. It's doing great. And that's that. We've got Palm Coast opened. So it's Tuscan Gardens of Palm Coast. We opened it on time, on budget. We're doing very well. We learned a lot, even from the initial startup. You do your first community, you make lots of mistakes because you don't know what you don't know until you know it, right? And so we managed to really plug a lot of those holes in the second one. So that's Tuscan Gardens of Palm Coast, about the same size. You're in that 130 to 140 range in units, assisted living and memory care. And then we broke ground in Delray Beach, and that's called Tuscan Gardens of Delray Beach, and same size range once again. And so we look for a Q1 2020 opening on that one. And then the next one that we're focused on in terms of ground up development is the independent living side of Palm Coast. So we opened up assisted living and memory care. And on the 13 acres that we've got, we went ahead and built the pad for the independent living side. So we'll be putting in somewhere around 120 to 136 units of independent living right there on the property there too. And that's sort of next up on the board. And then simultaneously, while we're doing the what we call the ground up development side of the business, we're also looking around for opportunities for wounded properties that have good bones, that good opportunity, but at the same time, for whatever reason, are behind the gun. They could be behind the gun based on financial structure, maybe change of circumstance in the ownership, or something that creates an opportunity for us to come in. We did, along this period of time, we did manage to do that with 4 separate properties, 3 in Florida, and then 1 in Texas, where we stepped in, recapitalized, and brought in fresh equity, and we're able to find homes for them, portions of which, of course, we own. So that's kind of the second aspect of the what we call strategic acquisition side of the business. So that's where Tuscan Gardens is at this point.
All right, so the empire's being built right now, and so I want to keep this in the context of like any real estate project, because of course you've done many of these. This is a big one. So let's talk about also, Larry. You mentioned the equity just a moment ago. What's been your funding plan? This is a large scale project. What's been your funding plan to get this to the state, the fabulous state you are right now?
Well, I mean, we use primarily, besides friends and family, money, but when you're dealing with these types of buildings, which are they're not single family homes, they're not small apartment buildings, they're $50 million projects. So, for that, you need quite a bit of equity. And for that, I've relied primarily on private offerings. So Reg D, 506 offerings, private offerings. So each one has been progressively bigger. So we've done, the first one was $1 million, which was really a seed capital one. And then from the $1 million, we did 5 million. We've done several since that time, both 506Bs that I know that we've talked about before, and 506Cs. And now we've got in front of the SEC, we have a Reg A plus, a $50 million Reg A plus, which if the government ever reopens, they might actually process at some point.
That's super. All right. Now, a couple questions come up. When you look back over the life cycle of this project. Was it different than any other real estate project you've worked on, number one? Number two, what are perhaps some of the single most important things you learned that might be beneficial to someone who's getting started to do their first small apartment building, for example?
I think that, those are all great questions. And, a little bit of my background, I've been involved in, all kinds of different asset classes inside, across the board, but also asset classes inside real estate. So I've done, single family homes and duplexes and quads and small apartment buildings. I remember my first 12-unit apartment building that, as a young lawyer, I bought here in downtown Orlando, and so forth. And I've done some investment ITC, historical properties in downtown Orlando. Did a number of those, and those were a lot of fun. So I really do think, if I just take a look at lessons, it's really no different in every one of those categories. It really is know everything that you can possibly know. I know that you've heard me speak before, Lance. I call it, know your business like the back of your hand. The biggest thing that I found when I went involved with senior living is that I didn't know it. And because I didn't know it, you need to go find out. You need to go learn it. And if you don't learn it, you're foolish, because it's not like the resources aren't out there. For in the apartment building space, you're an immense resource, for example, for your students, because of the fact that you bring experience to the table and you bring your resources to the table, which includes obviously other people that have competence and expertise. So, and your writings, the materials that you produce. So I would say that it is not a whole lot different than any other endeavor, in that what you need to know is know it before you actually do anything in it. And that just requires a deep dive. And that holds true, by the way, for anything. It holds true for real estate. It holds true I was involved in the restaurant business. I was involved in sporting goods business. Whatever it is, know it well and then go do it. So with that, senior living is really just the same. Now, knowing it then means that you have an opportunity to learn what are the primary attributes of it, which are most important to their success. So, I certainly, for example, in a single family home, when you're buying a property, a single family home, when you're buying an apartment building, you don't really have to be terribly concerned with excess demand or excess net demand against supply, because, the property's there, you got people who live there, they're coming in and out. So it's not a major function. But in senior living, when you're now putting someplace, you're going to put that much money into it, you better understand where your residents come from. You need to understand what that radius is that they come from primarily, and what kind of percentage actually comes from the younger decision makers who are making decisions for their elders, usually their parents. And so those are just aspects of the business that just come from understanding that you're now dealing with a different type of category of asset. But it's always the same. The only way to really make those decisions is to learn what are the levers that are success levers for that particular business. And for senior living, it's basically, 5 major levers that are involved. Number one, it is by far age and income qualified. So you need to understand that there's adequate excess demand of age and income qualified residents for wherever you want to either build or buy your particular facility. Number two, the site selection is critical. The site selection basically means that you've got to have the visibility that it carries its own weight, not that you have to push it with a whole lot of marketing and advertising. And I remember really struggling with that in the beginning, because I wanted something that was much more obscure, until I realized that I was just blowing in the wind, and that really that visibility is critical for senior living communities. Number three is really about food. So the operation is all about food, and that's the major driver for senior living. Number four is all about activity that you generate with it. And then I will say number five, and not because it's out of order, because it pervades everything, but just recognize that when it comes to a senior living community, your primary commitment is to your associates, is to your employees. Not because it's not to the resident, it is to the resident, but happy employees creates happy residents. And so when you allow yourself to create a culture where your associates are happy, guess what? Your residents are going to be happy too. And that, I guess, probably are really the lessons. The only other comment that I would make is that real estate can tend to be, obviously, there are any type of level of activity in real estate, all the way from the most passive to the most active. Senior living is by far the most active aspect. Mm-hmm. It is 75% business, 25% real estate, as opposed to, you talk about any number of other categories. Industrial warehouse, it's 95% real estate, 5% active business or management, if you will, and everything in between, hospitality, offices, multi-unit. So that aspect to it, in realizing that it's not a pure real estate activity, it is fundamentally a business that has real estate attributes attached to it, I think provide some substantial learning in that regard.
That's fascinating. And now, when you started off, you had a vision. You talked about you had a piece of paper and you wrote it down. And when you started off, did you envision a single facility, or did you have in mind these multiple facilities like you're driving to right now?
Yeah, always scalability. From a business standpoint, you have the choice, right? You have the choice of where you're going to invest your time. And so when you're going to make a business decision, now obviously this came from the heart in terms of the direction. But if you're now going to say, okay, I'm going to go do this, so now business considerations come to mind. And probably the cardinal business consideration is replicability and scalability. Because if you're not going to do that, you invest a tremendous amount of intellectual attention and emotional attention and resources and time and money and learning for a one-off. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Let's go ahead and now scale that. You learned an awful lot, Larry. So why don't you go ahead now and start scaling that by replicating what you've learned in other types of in other forms of value creation. So yeah, I went in it clearly with some attribute. When I was sitting there thinking about what it was going to look like, my next generation after the Great Recession, right? And I looked at it and I said, what does it have to have? Well, number one, I wanted to have brick and mortar. So it had to have a brick and mortar component attached to it. And obviously senior living did. But also number two, it had to have the wind at its back. I wanted to make sure that the wind was going to be at its back. And clearly with just numbers of seniors that are entering into that sort of category in their lives, that time in their lives, it was going to be that. And then, with that wind at your back, the opportunity to be able to replicate it so that I would actually have a scalable business that could produce wealth accretion, if you will, over time.
That's that. So this next question, Larry, is as you're speaking here, is, of course, you got your legal practice, which takes up a large portion of your time. You've built this fabulous organization and it's continuing to grow with Tuscan Gardens. Let's talk about time management, because you are one of the most productive human beings I know. So you got to explain how do you hold down a legal practice and the responsibilities with that while building this entire business from scratch, by the way, which you knew nothing about. So how did you do that? And any time management secrets or tips you could share, I think would be very much appreciated.
I'd be glad to share whatever. I mean, the way that I would probably best describe it is, I see an awful lot of people who are very smart people. And certainly from a standpoint of being smart, it's not about them being smart or not smart or anything of that nature, but they tend to churn a lot. They tend to churn a lot. And by churning, what I mean is they just kind of like go in circles, and they don't accomplish a lot as a result of that. So a month later, they're still sitting in the same place they were a month earlier. And you kind of wonder why. So from my standpoint, when I think in terms of effectiveness, at the end of the day, you know, you know where you are, you know what your next step needs to be, or you know where you ultimately want to be. And so you create the steps to be able to get there, and then you work to them. And so in order for me to do that, I need to do this. Okay, what do I need to do this? Well, it's only one of three options, right? You either know what you need to do, so do it. Number two, you don't know what you need to do, okay? Then number three, find out what you don't know that you need to do, and then find out so that you know what the next step is. It doesn't help you to be just simply churning on and on and on about a given instance, because it doesn't ever give you any forward movement, let alone forward momentum. Got off a conference call this morning with a group of people, and those are always fun, right? And you have a group of people, and I'm listening to them and talking and so forth, and they're talking about complaining about the person who made the changes, and they didn't even know what they were doing, and hey, we already talked about it. And I say, well, okay, so let's think in terms of where we want to be. What we want an executed contract, right? So if we're going to have an executed contract, we need to do certain things. What we probably need to do is to get them a copy of the modifications we might want to make to this contract. Number two, we probably want to sit down with them so they understand what the need was for these changes. And then number three, let's make sure that we have the people in the room who have the ability to be able to consent to those changes. And if we do those three things expeditiously, we're going to end up with an executed contract. I mean, like that. So I guess the point is, in terms of effectiveness, it's understanding what needs to be done, identifying those elements, and then executing on those elements. And if there is something that you don't know, identify what it is you don't know so that you can make the decision. And that's all I can say, Lance, is it's worked for me. You're not the first person who has made that comment about my effectiveness, but it's no secret. It's just kind of what I just suggested to you in terms of that. And as opposed to constantly processing and just kind of like wasting a lot of time churning in space. And it's like churning butter, right? It's like, okay, at a certain point, what'd you get out of that? So kind of like that.
Oh, great. Super. So what's next for Tuscan Gardens? Where does it go from here? You got a lot going on. You said you want to be something scalable. What do you see next for your senior living business?
There are a couple components to it. I mentioned that I've got, ground up development is there, and we probably have a pipeline of about 3 years selected already of the pipeline on ground up development. So, God willing and my health willing, and and making sure that the economy stays solid enough to be able to execute on that. That's there. Number two, I think that there's value that we can offer some existing communities that probably don't have either the branding or the clarity or the capital structures they need to be able to be long-term viable. So I think that those are opportunities for us to expand with the Tuscan Gardens brand and potentially maybe even a mid-market brand. And then I think that the third, we continue to take a look at other opportunities where the buildings are already in place and they could just simply be converted to senior living, which is a whole lot easier than starting with a piece of raw dirt and having to spend the next 15 months with government agencies to get the appropriate entitlements and approvals. So that's really the third category, and that can be a subject of some other discussion, Lance, because it kind of has some nuances attached to it.
All right, Larry. So, throughout your, with Dynatech, you were responsible for educating, gosh, I don't know how many students. You must have had,
hundreds of thousands.
Certainly. Hundreds of thousands. Yeah, I was going to say hundreds of thousands. So, and you've been in the business for so long, done so many different things that in the context of Tuscan Gardens, what you've done, and for people that, again, just getting started or fairly new to real estate, is there, I don't know, some obvious points of nuggets of wisdom you would share with them that are thinking about how am I going to possibly do my first apartment deal or first house deal? Wisdom you would share with them?
Yeah, well, the wisdom that I would share with them is don't listen to me, and here's what I mean by that. You know, I am a terrible piano player. I'm a terrible piano player, but I enjoy sitting at the piano and playing. And I know that when I sit at the piano and play, I get better by sitting at the piano and playing. And you know what is not motivating for me? Is to see somebody who sits at the piano and does this all over the place, and beautiful music comes out of it. And what I want to do is throw up my hands. And I want to basically say, man, I can never be like that guy. And so, right? And so I'm not going to try at all. And I have the same conversation with my daughter, Isabella, who, so I say, sweetie, just go out and play tennis. She's 15. Just go out and play tennis. Yeah, but I'm not any good. Well, okay, so you're not any good. Just go out and have fun, play tennis. And guess what? You'll be better after you played the game than before you played the game. You'll be better. It might only be this much, but you'll be better. I started in single family residential real estate, one piece of real estate at a time. I made an offer. I got the result. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. Sometimes I tweaked it, sometimes I threw it away and did it on another piece of property. But you do it one at a time. And don't ever compare yourself to somebody on your left or somebody on your right. Always just simply focus on what's in front of you and take the step towards it. That's how you gain expertise. And Lance, I am sure it's kind of like the first day I ever tried a case. The first time I ever tried a case, I was horrendous at it. And you know who I was representing? My father. And so I go in front of a judge, and he sees this guy he's never seen before, and he welcomes me to the bar, and he welcomes me to the courtroom, and he says, and I said, Your Honor, this is my father, Sam Pino. And he says, yes. And he says, young man, let me ask you, have you ever tried a case before? And I said, no, Your Honor. And he says, well, my hat's off to you. He says, he was a Southerner, right? My hat's off to you, sir. First case you ever tried was for your father. Welcome to the courtroom. And he made me feel so welcome, but you got to start somewhere, right? And I started, that just happened to be my dad, but I started someplace, right? So my advice, I guess, the honest point of this, and I mean truthfully from the heart, Lance, start wherever you are. Wherever you are is the right place to start. And learn as much as you can and take your shots on goal. You've got to take your shots on goal. If you don't take your shots, you will not learn, because you can only learn so much on the books, and you can only learn so much talking to people, but you've got to take your shots. And every time you take a shot, you're going to learn from that shot. That went to the left and that went to the right. And this guy thought I was nuts with that offer. And these guys are laughing at me. I don't care. You take your shots on goal, and all of a sudden one lands in, and you say, okay, let me see if I can do that again. And then you did your second shot. Then you do your third. And that's how you develop expertise in anything you do. My advice to those individuals who are your students who have never done any of this or are just starting, say, that's okay. Embrace yourself where you are, learn everything you can, and start taking shots.
Perfect. All right, everyone. Mr. Larry Pino, and CEO, founder of Tuscan Gardens, and author of the book Reinventing Senior Living. And I got to share everyone from a Renaissance man. Where's my other one up? Reach over here. Just go.
Oh,
Other book. How to make full-time. This is Cash In on Cash Flow, which was written, I don't know, Larry, this is a long time ago.
That was written in 1988, maybe? Something like that. No, 1998. 1998. So
I'm the Renaissance man.
You see that picture is just a little bit younger Larry Pino.
The Renaissance man, which at this point had no idea he'd be doing this at this juncture in his life. I can certainly pretty much says by that. So you get his Reinventing Senior Living. Listen, it's going to be a factor for all of us one way or another through our parents or ourselves. And fabulous resource. It's on Amazon. I understand, correct, Larry? On Amazon. And Larry, all the profits go to the Alzheimer's Association. So we're only dealing. We get the growing baby boomer generation ourselves and our parents. So I got this resource available to you. You got Tuscan Gardens. You can find them online at I imagine it's TuscanGardens.com. Is that right, Larry?
Yeah, it's TuscanGardens.com, and you can learn more about it. And there's a video story that there's a video that goes on there that kind of tells the personal story about my mother and so forth. And
of course, he has an active legal practice. Now, he's a very selective legal practice. And Larry, if you want to put in 2 cents about what you might be looking for or not looking for with additional clients in your legal practice.
The clients that I've got, Lance, are like you. It is a full relationship. I'm not what I call a retail lawyer. So, I don't take on clients who just simply call and say, hey, can you do my will? I don't do that, but I'm a full frontal commercial attorney. I learn everything about your business. I know your business as much as I know my own, so that I have the opportunity to really be a good business lawyer to you. So if there are any of your students, your clients that are looking for that type of relationship, certainly they're certainly welcome to call me and we can talk about it.
All right, super. Larry, this has been great. I'm continually amazed at what you do, and I'm really was super impressed with Tuscan Gardens when I saw it at Venetian Bay, and the fabulous location, but the whole story, and I wanted to get him to share. So thank you for sharing this story with all of our podcast listeners.
You're certainly welcome, and thanks for having me on your program, Lance.
Thank you so much, as always. Everyone, this is Lance Edwards. This is Greenlight REI. Now, we're going to have this recording will be up on greenlightreinvesting.com. We'll have the show notes as well. And also, you go to greenlightreinvesting.com. Check out another podcast we did with Larry on syndication and raising funds. It's a fabulous topic on different types of security laws, which is one of the popular questions. And Larry's living example, he's doing it right here in his own project. So until next time, make your real estate lifestyle success. Take care, everyone. Thank you, Larry.
All right. Bye. Thanks, Lance.
You've been listening to The Expert with Lance Edwards. Let us now blatantly and shamelessly bribe you toward creating your own real estate lifestyle by offering you a whole bunch of free stuff. Go to greenlightreinvesting.com and get you some free stuff and this session's show notes.